This is a fantastic whisky. It's one of the best value peated drams that you can buy today, and it's one of the ballsiest of all Islay whiskies. But this is one that a lot of you are going to be familiar with. It's kind of a case of when is a Bruichladdich not a Bruichladdich. This stuff for anyone that doesn't know, and I'm sure all of you do, but I'm going to say it anyway. Bruichladdich distillery on the Isle of Islay, founded in 1881, reopened in 2001. They decided very early on that they wanted to make peated whisky, because peated whisky is traditional whisky, and it's traditional Islay whisky. And in the very early days, they had this idea of resurrecting another distillery which closed down on Islay, which was called Port Charlotte, obviously situated in the nearby village of Port Charlotte. For whatever reason, that didn't happen, so what they did instead was to make peated, heavily peated whisky, because Port Charlotte is heavily peated, despite the fact that Octomore exists as their extremely heavily peated brand. Port Charlotte, no matter what anyone says, is also heavily peated. So they started making heavily peated whisky under the Port Charlotte name at the same Bruichladdich distillery. And the current incarnation of Port Charlotte that we've got as a standard entry-level whisky is this stuff, because it's been through a few iterations and variations. This is what you can buy now. There are a few other premium options which are higher strength. They have different cask treatments, but this is basically the standard flagship, entry-level, available, affordable, peated Bruichladdich, aka Port Charlotte. So this stuff is a firm favourite amongst peated whisky aficionados. It's bottled at 50%. It's made with Scottish barley, the same as all Bruichladdich whisky. Fermented, distilled, matured and bottled on site at Bruichladdich on Islay. It is rumoured by Bruichladdich to be natural colour and non-chill filtered, but for some reason they weren't brave enough to guarantee those things on the label. Even though they do for this one, and they did for the old Port Charlottes. What is it about Port Charlotte that makes them not quite certain enough to make those guarantees? Obviously we know that because it's Bruichladdich, it almost certainly is natural colour and non-chill filtered, but you never know these days. Stranger things have happened. Distilleries that previously championed craft maturation do U-turns and they start doing horrible things, and Bruichladdich could do that without the guarantee on the label. We can't be sure. What we do know though is that it's made with Scottish barley, peated to 40 parts per million, so that's similar ballpark as Laphroaig and Ardbeg and Lagavulin. It's diluted with Islay spring water. It has a 10-year-old age statement. So apart from those minor niggles about not having the guarantees for colouring and filtration on the label, it ticks all the boxes. It is still a composite natural cork though. I would have thought that out of all Scottish distilleries, if one of them was going to make the leap into the 21st century or even the 20th century and give us a quality screw cap or a synthetic cork, I would have thought Bruichladdich would have done it, but not yet. What they have done is they are using less glass in their bottles these days. The bottles are all lighter and it's no longer available with a tin. All of the Bruichladdich and Port Charlotte releases, and Octomore as well, all used to come in tins. There is no option for that on Port Charlotte anymore. Personally, I think that's a good thing, but I think for a £50 whisky, I would like the option of a recycled cardboard box along the lines of what Ardnamurchan can do, because sometimes I buy a bottle of whisky and it might be several years before I actually get around to drinking it. It'd be good to have something to keep the dust and the sunlight away, but that's just me. As for the casks that go into this one, we are told pretty much everything from Bruichladdich. We know that it's 65% first fill American whiskey casks, 10% second fill American whiskey casks, and 25% second fill French wine casks. 25%. It's rather a lot, right? So slightly unusually for a heavily peated Islay whisky, there's going to be significant wine influence on this one. And while that's not unheard of, it certainly makes it a little bit different, progressive, you might say. And I'm going to get it out of the way right now, and I'm going to admit that I used to buy the old no age statement Port Charlotte all the time, the same as I used to buy the Laddie 10, which was replaced by the classic Laddie. I used to buy the one that came before this one all the time, which was said to be around 5 years old. And when they switched the no age statement Port Charlotte and the 10-year-old Laddie 10 for these two contemporary bottles, I stocked up on the old bottles, because you know all about the history of me and my problems with this one. I like it. I think that it's a decent whiskey for a decent price, but I do have problems with this one, mostly down to the fact that I really prefer the previous bottle. And when this stuff came out, I must admit that the reason why I haven't reviewed this one yet is because when they first changed to the 10-year-old age statement for Port Charlotte, I did not like it as much as the old stuff. So this will be an interesting little revisit of Port Charlotte, and it'll be interesting to see if my feelings have softened towards it at all. So let's get some in the glass and see if that's the case. I do love this bottle. I like pretty much all of the bottles that Bruichladdich, Port Charlotte and Octomore use, but I think probably this one, out of all of them, is a stunner. Do you agree? You can see how medicinal it's going to taste before you even pop the cork. It really looks like an old-fashioned medicine or like barbicide or antiseptic bottle or something like that, doesn't it? Fantastic, old-worldy, traditional, just lovely bit of design there. Anyway, enough about what it looks like. What does it smell like and what does it taste like? Port Charlotte 10 on the nose. Surprise, surprise, smoky. In particular, like a coal fire that's been lit with wood. So smoky coal dust and coal smoke, but also with a little bit of wood smoke and perhaps a little bit of barbecue mixed in. Also a little bit solventy, but not in a bad way, not in an immature, horrible, spirity acetone way, not that at all. Solventy as in it's a real slightly ugly, very ballsy, very characterful, medicinal, industrial, oily, dirty type of peated whiskey. I think that this is absolutely not one for the faint of heart. This is one for the hardcore peat addicts. Solventy, a little bit of a marker pen note, as well as lots and lots of peated grist, lots of barley notes coming through that smoke. Actually a surprising amount of barley notes coming through. The barley influence cutting through that, what is, to be fair, a very busy cask influence. Really very medicinal on the nose, and not just because of the peat. And this is one of probably the main thing that put me off this one, that I wasn't happy about when they changed from the Port Charlotte no age statement to the Port Charlotte 10. One thing is that by doubling the length of maturation, you do lose a noticeable amount of peat. And this is still a heavily peated whiskey, but it hasn't got the raw peat of that old, roughly 5-year-old no age statement release. But the other thing that I really didn't like when I first tried this is the wine influence, because we know from Bruichladdich that this stuff has 25% second fill French wine casks, and it feels, you can really notice the wine influence on this one. Very winey, heady wininess, and quite a mineral, chalky pill, bitter, kind of aspirin paracetamol. Quite mineral, and probably quite coastal as well. Quite a strong minerality and a little bit of a shingle beach and like bracing sea air note on the nose. Rock pools, funky seashore at low tide with a little bit, and I'm pleased to say that it has, in my opinion, a little bit of that creamy lactic note that kind of classic Bruichladdich used to have a lot of. And that's something that I really miss from a lot of Bruichladdich, so I'm pleased to notice that in this one. It does make you wonder if they're doing what a lot of distilleries do and cutting a little bit deeper into the faints with the peated stuff. Because with peated whiskey, you can do that and get away with it, because it not only increases your efficiency, but with a peated whiskey, it can also add a little bit of body and character as well, providing you don't go too far. That wine, though, is always there. I think from the wine, I'm getting like a little bit of a cough syrup note. Cough syrup, and kind of like those medicines you used to get when you were a kid, where they're kind of fruit flavoured to disguise the fact that it's horrible tasting medicine. Not that this is horrible tasting or smelling, but it's got that slightly synthetic fruit syrup quality to it. And I think that is coming through from those wine casks. Dark fruits, black cherry, black forest gatto. And I guess that's a combination of those dark fruit notes from the wine and that creamy lactic quality. Very medicinal. Deep heat, gingery oak, menthol, TCP. Lots of medicine cabinet notes. Cough sweets, cherry flavoured cough sweets. As well as an underlying caramel sweetness coming through from those first fill bourbon casks. And all the way through, kind of not being pushed around by the peat at all, which I'm glad to say. You've got this strong, bright and fizzy barley sugar note. So, an unusual, but frankly phenomenal nose on this one. Let's see how it tastes. Again, a strong medicinal kind of cough sweets, cough candy and cough syrup medicine theme, and I think a lot of that is coming through from those fruity wine casks combined with that smoky medicinal peat. As I said before, I do think that this stuff is a little bit lighter on the peat than the old No Age Statement Port Charlotte was, which is almost always just a consequence of maturing a whiskey for longer. If you mature a peated whiskey for long enough, that peat transforms into something else. It's very, very rare that you can mature a peated whiskey for longer and still retain that smokiness. But to be fair to Bruichladdich, they have retained enough. It's still what I would call a heavily peated whiskey. Lots of peated grist coming through on the palate of this one. Quite salty again with that kind of maritime coastal sea breeze note. Some smoked fish, as well as some cough sweets. It's an interesting idea, isn't it? Eating smoked fish with cough sweets. Probably won't try that one. Getting some damp wool coming through on the palate of this one, as well as like a little bit of industrial oiliness, like a light machine oil. Quite a bit of woodiness on the late palate. Spicy, peppery, gingery, woody, licorice notes. Licorice and salmiak, perhaps salted licorice. Overall quite dark and woody, and I think you can probably tell that there's been some European oak used in this one, because you've got that particularly spicy and slightly bitter quality to the oakiness. As for the finish on this one, I'm going to say quite long with dark fruits, dry wood smoke, quite salty, and lots of peated grist. I think that the surprising thing on this one, the unusual thing, and as I said before, one of the things that I didn't really like when I first tried this whiskey is how medicinal it is and the medicinal qualities that come through, not from the peat. I think that the wine influence in this gives it that little bit of a cough sweet, cough candy medicinal note. I would say that if you haven't had this, I would say that if you're familiar with Ardbeg, it's more of an Ugadal rather than an Ardbeg 10, which, depending on your preference, could be good or bad. I do think that it's really nice, though, to have a fruity Islay peat bomb, especially one that's available, very easily available, at least here in the UK, and at a fair price. Because I think that a lot of distilleries these days, especially Islay distilleries where age statements are plummeting, for want of a better word, I think that a lot of distilleries like Laphroaig in particular, they don't have as much of that fruity estery profile anymore, which I think is probably in a large part down to a lot of distilleries not top dressing their vattings with the old stuff like they used to. I think that this one, thanks to those wine casks, it has a little bit of that fruitiness that we don't tend to get as much anymore. But as I said, that fruitiness is probably largely coming through from the wine casks rather than the malt. But either way, I think that it works quite well, and it's definitely unique. The wine influence in this one, though, is definitely a large part of why I stopped buying this. I'm not sure if that old Port Charlotte no age statement expression was fully bourbon matured, but I think it was certainly much more so. It was definitely predominantly bourbon matured, and it really had more of like a Laphroaig Kalila profile to it, which is why when I first tried this, I think it was released in 2018, and when I first tried it, I really couldn't get over that kind of cask circus flavour profile that it has. And honestly, I was both surprised and disappointed by the direction that Bruichladdich had taken this one as well as this one. It's absolutely not surprising to see wine casks in the current modern Bruichladdich offerings, though. Bruichladdich, the owners of Bruichladdich, are wine people after all. A lot of the people that were responsible for the reopening of the distillery had history in the wine industry. And Bruichladdich as a distillery have been some of the pioneers of using wine casks in whisky maturation. Whether you think that's a good thing or a bad thing, they were definitely there day one. Bruichladdich, they were also, I think, the first people to really talk about terroir in whisky, which before that was really only something that people talked about with respect to wine. So, not surprising to see wine casks being so widely adopted in the maturation of Bruichladdich products. Is this still great whisky? Yeah, it is. It is one of the icons of Islay, and while it doesn't quite fit in with my quite traditional sensibilities about what a peated Islay whisky should be about, it is a great whisky. Would it have been better with sherry instead of wine? Possibly. That's probably the direction that I would have taken it. But if they had done that, you would have potentially just ended up with something more along the lines of like a Laphroaig Triplewood or an Ardbeg Ugadal. It certainly wouldn't have been the unique experience that it is today. And to be perfectly honest with you, and this surprises me to be saying this stuff has really, really grown on me since I've had this bottle. I am down to about halfway through or a little bit more. And when I first tried it, I thought, yeah, I remember these are the reasons why I didn't like this. But as time's gone on, I think I've grown accustomed to it a little bit more, and I've started to really appreciate the mix of flavours that we've got in this. And I don't think that it's a case of this bottling having changed over the last 6 years that it's been available. I think that it's still very similar to how it was when I first tried it. But I think what has probably happened is over the last 6 years, I myself have changed a little bit. I make absolutely no secret about disliking wine casks in whisky, and I still think that wine in whisky is almost always at least a little bit jarring at times. But I have finally got to the point, and this may be the whiskey and wine industry wearing me down, but I finally got to the point where I can say that I do like this one a lot. And I'm actually glad that it has that wine influence, and that wine influence is such a key part of it. So would I buy this again? Absolutely. This one is never going to be my desert island, if you could only have one whiskey type dram, but I'm really glad that it exists. Personally, I'd probably stick to my usual favourites of like Lafroig 10 cask strength, Ardbeg 10, and various Kalilas, especially independently bottled Kalilas. They are perhaps a little bit more traditional and more along the lines of what I like, but this is a fantastic experience to have every now and again. And I actually really hope that they don't change it again. I think that if you like heavily peated malts and you don't mind a bit of wine in your whiskey, then you'll probably love this. So thanks for coming along with me on this little journey of discovery and development. Let me know in the comments what you think about this one, what you think about the Port Charlotte range in general, because there's quite a few other special editions. And let me know what whiskies have really grown on you. What have you had where you didn't immediately warm to it? Perhaps you had certain flavours in it that you really didn't get on with, but you started to, like me with the wine influence in this one, you start to really appreciate them once you gave it a chance. Look forward to hearing your experiences. Thanks for watching, and cheers.